That's all right.
I was just thinking to myself, did I see the numbers turning? Okay, we gotta start over.
Well, that's fun.
Okay. It was so good, too. All right, well, at least we didn't do the whole thing. All right.
Welcome
Take
back
two.
again.
I forgot to push record. So that happens sometimes, especially when you're me.
Here.
Especially when you're me. I forget things. It's comical, but we walk down the street and I was like, oh, I love that building. And my family's like, yeah, you say that every time we walk by.
Yeah.
So I can read my favorite book. I can read it every year because I have no idea how it's going to end. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Oh, this is so good. I can't remember anything. So, all right. So we're going to start over.
Take two.
We're going to introduce your coffee cup.
Oh, yeah. Let's start with the coffee cup. Okay. We have blue and gray. Blue and green. This is a Goodwill find. Commercially produced in China by Great Gatherings.
Okay, so basically it's made by the man with slave children. And
Probably.
and it's interesting how people see colors, because you're like, oh, it's blue and green. I'd say it's gray and gray. So
Gray and gray, really?
Yeah, warm gray, cool gray.
How about that?
Yeah.
I would call that green and gray.
See? We can't reconcile our worlds. This is
We all live in our own world.
What are you going to do? Oh, well, let's just give up.
So, number two.
Oh, yeah. We got some
unique,
merch.
Individualized merch. One of a kind. Cannot be bought.
Your wife
for my birthday.
This for your birthday.
Yeah.
So great.
And my friends, remember Shane and Mary?
Yeah.
Out in Michigan? They're starting to do t-shirts, so
awesome.
Check out the Gettin' Place if you want a t-shirt.
That's really,
in Dearborn,
really cool.
Michigan.
So welcome to Talking in the Chasm. Compassionate,
controversial conversations between best friends,
holy man,
and an atheist.
I'm Felix.
And I'm Matthew. Welcome. Again.
So... what we were going to talk about is
what we have been talking about.
It was so good too. We're never going to see, because it's lost, the best stuff. It's the Library of Alexandria. It's Alexandria. Man, you missed it. So we were going to talk about whether or not it is possible or even desirable to separate the art from the artist. And when I think about that, I'm talking about Michael Jackson, Bill Cosby, thinking about this Me Too movement. And, if Michael Jackson's music is great, can I still listen to it knowing that he's a pedophile, assuming that he's a pedophile? And that's hard. Is it okay for art to just live on its own as art? Michael Jackson's music, can it just be good music and have nothing to do with the man who created it? And
let's say that this conversation about him in particular is for the sake of argument. He was never convicted.
Right.
There's no actual legal
so I think that we both
proof.
Saw Leaving. Did you see it too?
Yeah.
So we saw Leaving Neverland.
At least the first part I saw.
And I was pretty blown away. I mean, I had heard stuff before, and I kind of suspected, but this really cemented it for me. Not just because it was one crazy kid saying, "Oh, this happened to me," but it was so many children, child after child after child, saying the exact same thing of the grooming and the.
Don't you remember that though from when we were kids? I mean, you're a little bit older than me, but I remember in the late '80s, early '90s, everybody's like, "Yeah, Bad is the baddest album ever." But he's weird. Yeah. And it's certainly in the 90s, there was all the controversy with Macaulay Culkin, and by then it had come out that he had children sleeping in his bed alone, but they were saying nothing was wrong with it. So even at the height of his cultural power, everyone still...
Yeah, he was dogged with this for sure his whole life.
Yeah.
So, but for the sake of this conversation, I think let's assume that Michael Jackson is a pedophile. And let's assume that Bill Cosby is a multiple rapist.
Well, that we know.
Serial rapist.
That's been proven.
All right, so Bill Cosby, he's hilarious.
Yeah.
He's really
I listened
funny.
to his records growing up as a kid.
Yeah, and I watched all the shows, and I especially love when he has little kids on, the children say the darndest things or whatever that was.
Kids say the darndest things.
Yeah, because he is so great with the kids. It's so funny, and I love his whole demeanor. But as I say, it's tainted simply because now every time I even see his face, I just think of him roofing some poor woman.
But can you eat Jell-O?
Yeah, and I never could eat Jell-O. I'm just no. I mean, that to me that's completely different because it's sort of
it's not his product,
right? I mean, they hired OJ to hawk the Samsonite luggage or whatever it was, and Hertz rent a car.
Yeah.
But they quickly distanced themselves from him. Again, not proven.
Not
right?
proven.
Yeah. He's a murderer. I'm just not sure if you are. Yeah. So let's be.
Okay. For anybody that wasn't.
He's a murderer.
Wasn't on the same page.
He did it. All right. But seriously, Michael Jackson is a musical genius. And that is something that is probably not too
controversial,
arguable, right? I mean, even if you don't like Michael Jackson,
he's certainly innovative. And,
I mean, I'm
changed the musical world, whether you like his music or not.
I'm a musician, and I actually didn't like his music. It's only been more recent, the past 25 years that I've really grown to appreciate it. And
probably just since you're old enough to be nostalgic.
Yeah. And I saw an interesting thing about how he makes his music. He doesn't read music. He doesn't really know anything about the technical aspects of how music works. And he just takes a voice recorder and he just hums bits of songs. He'll do the bass line and then he'll say, oh, and this is what the guitar should do and here's what the drum should do. And it's basically exactly how it ends up. I mean, he has a complete vision, auditory vision in his head of exactly how it goes. And then the fact that he can't write it down doesn't make any difference. It's still genius.
So maybe he's like a musical savant.
Yeah. But that he's a pedophile has made it so that I can't really listen to him. I mean, I took his music all off my playlist simply because when I hear it, I just think of him grooming little kids, and so it's very difficult for me to do that. So art should stand on its own. I mean, theoretically, art should stand on its own.
Because the music doesn't change regardless of who it is, But the painting doesn't change, the comedy bit doesn't be any less or more funny.
But what's interesting is that my perception has changed, and therefore, and so the question is that okay to separate the art from the artist? Is it something that should be done, or is it even a moral imperative? Can you no longer buy Michael Jackson records? And
so we were discussing the potential of the idea. So one thing before we get to that, I think if we're going to look at the case, we have to talk about, if we're going to analyze the artist in context of the art, we have to look at the artist. And so it's not just the idea that Michael Jackson is messing with children, but also that he was messed with as a child, that from his youth, from very young, 5-6 years old, he's on stage probably being beaten by his father, physical, emotional, and psychological abuse, all those dynamics. And then also we were discussing what a weird world that Michael Jackson lived in. Like, really, he's the only person in his world. Like, everyone else is a feature or a thing, like a tree. Like, he's from his perspective, he's the only person in his world. And because he can go anywhere and can do anything and can possess anything, in living in that bubble of isolating power, but also can't go anywhere because he can't. You talk about that grocery store thing. Yeah,
he another celebrity, and I don't remember who it was, but as a gift to Michael Jackson, rented a grocery store and hired a bunch of actors to pretend like they were regular people shopping, and then brought Michael Jackson in and said, here's your gift, you're going to get to go grocery shopping like a regular person. So he pushes around the cart, and all the actors don't look at him and don't go, oh my God, it's Michael Jackson. They just are just ignoring him and going about their day, doing their shopping. And he's like giddy. He's like, oh my gosh, I can just pull stuff off the shelf, and I could just pick this cereal, I could pick this out, and macaroni, and oh wow, this is just crazy. And there's something that's sort of profoundly sad about the fact that he can't walk down a street like a regular person. I mean, it really feels like it must feel like a prison. I mean, he cannot go anywhere without being mobbed. And people think, oh wow, with that kind of money, that's the trade-off. I'd like that life. It's like, would you? You don't get to turn it off. Mm-hmm. Never. It's never off. You hear about these celebrities punching photographers. It's like, I just want to walk my daughter to school one time. Can I just for one time walk her to school? It's like, no, you cannot.
There's a funny concept of like a prison of everything. Like there's a human impulse to find the edge and go past it. But when there's no more edge, then everything becomes a prison. Like if you have all the money and power, like you can do anything and you can possess anything. This irony is actually built into the biblical narrative. The book of Ecclesiastes, it's also called The Preacher, is a very sobering and very dark, almost nihilistic piece of biblical prose. And it's from the end of Solomon's life. And what happens to Solomon is that God gives him, he has an experience with God, and God says, whatever you want, I'll give it to you, in a place called Gibeah. And Solomon says, he's a young king, and he says, I'm afraid. I don't know how to do what I'm supposed to do. I'm the king over this great people. I don't know how to go out, and I don't know how to come in. What I really need from you is wisdom. And God says to him, because you asked for wisdom, because you didn't ask for power and you didn't ask for money, I'll give you wisdom, and your wisdom will bring power, and your wisdom will bring money. Yeah. And he opens the floodgates of human potential in Solomon's life. And what Solomon does then is live this life of incredible wisdom, incredible power, incredible wealth. And by the end of his life, he writes this work called The Preacher, and it is dark. It says things like, vanity of vanities, all life is vanity. It's very, very sobering. And the point seems to be in the biblical narrative that if you unleash all the potential of a human life, and he can have anything, do anything, be anything, he ends up alone, depressed, and broken, in ruin. Yeah. But there's something about potential that's still out there that gives us hope in life.
That's really interesting. I mean, in thinking about this man before the pedophilia thing, I was imagining, what it would be like to never be told no in your life. Yeah. Nobody says no to Michael Jackson. Everybody just wants to be around him and be in his glow. And so you had two things. One is you're never told no, no matter what, which must screw with you. Head. I mean, and maybe that feeds into the pedophilia thing. It's like, well, I can do anything. I'm basically God. I mean, if I want this child, I have this child. Yeah. Nobody says no. The parents don't say no. They don't, fully understand what's going on. And certainly there was deception, on his part. So it's not like he didn't know that it was right from wrong. Yeah. But I mean, just the fact that he was never told no skews that, I think. Yeah. The fact that the money or the price of things does not factor into his decision making whatsoever. Do I want a gold Rolls Royce, or do I want a platinum Rolls Royce, or do I want a Lamborghini, or
do I want a roller coaster in my living room, or a gorilla?
It doesn't make any difference. I mean, money isn't part of the equation. It's do I want it, yes or no? Yeah. But all these things I think are causes for the behavior, not excuses for the behavior. You know what I mean? It's like we can say, okay, he's a weird guy who never had a childhood because he was professional musician at the age of 5 years old, and so he never got to be a child, and so he's looking for that. He's perpetually gonna be a child, and he's gonna have a roller coaster in his backyard and ride it like a child, and that's his right to do that, I suppose, right? He didn't have a childhood. We can't possibly understand what it would be like to be Michael Jackson. I mean, to me, it sounds like a nightmare. I mean, It sounds like a living nightmare. And I used to want to be a rock star, and I would think, oh, I really wanted that. I definitely don't want that. I wanted the kind of fame like Frank Zappa, right? Nobody knows who that guy is walking down the street except for the people who really like him. And the people who really like him are going to mostly be respectful and be like, oh, you're great, and that's it. I don't want Justin Bieber fame, right? Where you walk out the street and 10 minutes later, there's 50 girls surrounding you because they've all Instagrammed, oh my gosh, he's here, right? Unfortunately, you don't get to choose what kind of fame you get. You get what you get,
and it seems like Michael Jackson's not an isolated case. I mean, Nicolas Cage goes crazy on wild spending sprees and blows all his money. Like, the closer you get to the pinnacle of popular culture, the higher your incidence of insanity.
Right. I mean,
John Travolta. I mean, people go nuts when they live in that world. When you are in a place where no one ever tells you no, and you have no limits on your life.
I mean, Michael J. Fox wrote his autobiography. He talks about the height of his fame, Family Guy,
in the 80s.
Family Ties, and the first Back to the Future and stuff.
Teen Wolf.
He said there was a moment in my life where nobody said no. Everybody just wanted to be around me, and he's like, I turned into a jerk. He's like, I was a total jerk to
How would you not?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'd like to think I wouldn't, but I mean, we don't know. You don't know.
Well, all those people
hard.
surely did too.
Right, and I mean, he's a sensitive, intelligent guy, from what I can gather. But anyway, back to this idea. So we can give a reason for Michael Jackson's bad behavior, I suppose.
But is it an excuse?
But we can't excuse it, right? I mean, and the fact is, I am against pedophilia, right? So when I listen to Michael Jackson, that's what I think about. Therefore, Michael Jackson will forever be linked with pedophilia, so I just don't listen to Michael Jackson anymore. Now, the question goes, well, what if you learn that, that Mozart or Johann Sebastian Bach or somebody is a murderer or is a misogynist or whatever it is,
or Aristotle? What if we get into the realm of ideas instead of products?
That's a good one.
Or art.
That's a very good one, actually, because an idea is something that you cannot separate yourself from. I mean, you live a way or you don't. If
it's true, it's either true or it's not, regardless of who discovers it.
And let's say that, like I said before, it's like, let's say that whoever first said "love thy neighbor," okay, let's say that guy turns out to be an abhorrent person. I'm not gonna discard the idea of loving my neighbor just because the person that first articulated it turned out to be an awful person, So I don't think it's even possible to separate idea. I think that it's not possible to link ideas eternally with the people who created them, As you said, it's like 2 + 2 = 4. The person that discovered that and made that abstract into a sort of a reality, that's it. That's truth. That's out there, and there's nothing that you can do. Is art the magnification of the person's personality? Isn't that what art is? It's sort of like, here's me.
A manifestation of their person. Well, and what's interesting to me is that artists tend to be the people on the fringe. They're the people that don't generally, especially if we know about them today from the past, they were people who didn't fit in their world and were pushing at the fringes. So homosexuality is very common among artists that we remember. When you look into famous painters or famous musicians, or they're people that live on the fringe of their society, and they're pushing the envelope of what's acceptable in a lot of different ways. And so the fact that we find within that class of people these kinds of breaking of social norm and social rule is not surprising, But what does it mean when those things? Where's our line when that's too far?
Yeah, when those things
become evil,
are at odds with our own morality.
Like who's the guy that the Nazi composer?
Wagner?
Yeah, Wagner. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what about that? Like,
I know. I mean, I love Wagner. I really do. I listened to him when I was a child. I was a weird kid. I didn't listen to rock and roll until I was like 18. And this is what happens.
Watch out, kids.
Totally, yeah. I was big. My parents were just classical music people, and that's what I listened to. And the Townhouse Overture still puts a lump in my throat. And I'm anti-Nazi. So what are you gonna do?
So one idea that we were exploring that you weren't terribly fond of is that my idea was something that I was proposing was that the reason we have social mores is because we're defending our world. Like, we're against pedophilia for a whole host of reasons, not least of which is the child being harmed. But even bigger than the child being harmed is the world being harmed, like society breaking. And so we have certain social rules like don't kill, don't rape, to keep humanity alive. Like, there's a self-preservation behind all that as a social animal. So does that tie into this issue? In other words, since this is our world, since we were kids listening to Michael Jackson, and we find out now that this pop culture icon was a monster behind closed doors, it behooves us more to put that aside and to say, no, we're not going to, that's tainted in our world. But maybe in 150 years it wouldn't be.
Well, you suggest the people that he hurt are still alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And what does that mean when your society is embracing someone who hurt you?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that I don't like the idea of time as a separation making it okay is that, pedophilia is pedophilia.
It's always wrong.
It's always wrong, and when you discover that someone you appreciate is a pedophile, it's very difficult to reconcile that. I don't know all of Wagner's associations with Nazi. I mean, I know that Hitler loved him. I thought that he was the greatest composer of all time, but a lot of other people think that, so I don't know what Wagner's thing, and I mean, maybe I will learn and then I won't like Wagner anymore. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's certainly something that can be said about people in the present who are still alive. Bill Cosby, for instance. If I buy a Bill Cosby record, that money's going to him. Mm-hmm. So it's as if I am funding this reprehensible human being. Yeah. Whereas if I buy a Johann Sebastian Bach record, that's not going to him.
He's not getting anything. Neither is his family, neither is anybody.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's sort of a moral imperative to separate the art from the artist. But then there's part of me that just doesn't want to know. It's like, what if I find out that all my artists are awful people, and then then what?
Well, I think it's very likely that they are.
Yeah. Well, like what you were saying earlier, it's like, what makes great art is friction. Yeah. Is difficulty. What's interesting, one of my favorite stories is Francisco Goya. Uh-huh. He was just a court painter, Rococo, guy that just made inane paintings of the royal family. But his paintings have this sort of glow about them that when you see them in real life, that people are like, wow, there's something that's really cool about the way. And it turns out it has to do with the white paint that he used. And this paint he made himself, and there's a high concentration of lead in this paint. Mm-hmm. And as he makes this paint, he becomes poisoned with this lead. He gets lead poisoning, and he gets very sick. And he starts drawing these crazy paintings, Saturn devouring his children, these dark paintings that are incredible. And then he gets so sick that he can't paint anymore, and he goes to bed, and then he recuperates over a period of months. and then he comes back to it and begins painting again, and then gets sick again. But it's at that point where he is the sickest that his paintings are
the best,
the most amazing. I mean, that's what we remember him as, this dark, sinister, works. Nobody remembers him for his court paintings of the Spanish royal family, and nobody cares. They're fine, they're great.
But they're not special.
Right, and Edgar Allan Poe was an insane person who had people theorizing, but he had a super high aversion to alcohol, and it caused him serious brain malfunction. Caused him to do these things. And maybe this is a separate topic, but would you cure him? Would you tell Goya, dude, the paint is your problem. Yeah. Don't mix the paint, but wear gloves.
Yeah.
Then we don't get Saturn devouring his children. You say, Edgar Allan Poe, there's medication that will totally help you. You stop drinking and take this medication, and then that's it. None of that horrible, I'm going insane artwork.
Well, and there's I think if I'm remembering correctly, the Greeks used to call epilepsy the sickness of the gods, because people would have seizures and go into ecstatic states.
Yeah. And
produce philosophy art.
That's interesting. My sister had a seizure disorder, and I read this, and then it turned out to be totally true. But right before for different types of seizures, but for many types of seizures, right before you have a seizure, you go into a state of euphoria. And my sister one time, she said, "I love you. I just want you to know how much I love you, and you're just so wonderful, and life is so wonderful." And then she had a seizure. I was like, wow, it's just like this, it's crazy. In her case, I would certainly get rid of the seizure disorder too, and also the euphoria that precedes it. Yeah. But anyway, so
here's I don't know about the answer to that, but it occurred to me that there's another complex question about art and artists. Is that okay? So Michael Jackson's music, that's one thing. He was a pedophile. What about listening to the Jackson 5? Now, Michael Jackson isn't the bad guy there, he's the victim there. Is there just as much problem listening to the Jackson 5 when this little boy is being put through an artist mill?
The problem is this, with that, the little boy isn't a pedophile.
I know, but the little boy is being exploited.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So you're listening to the product of exploitation. Right. It's not, the artist isn't the exploiter, the artist is the exploited.
Yeah, would you say that though about black blues artists in the 20s and 30s and 40s who were, not paid by the record companies? They were exploited themselves. That's a tough one. I mean, and then another thing I thought about with the separating the art from the artist is, what about artists who say bad things but don't practice bad things? Like there's rap. There's quite a few rap artists that I listen to, and that I really like the music in it. Is like misogynistic and just awful, right? But the people who make them are not that way in real life. What does that mean? It's like...
See, I would have a problem with that because that's putting something into the culture and into the world. Like,
yeah,
that's damaging and destructive.
Right, but what about fiction about murder and rape?
Stephen King novels.
Yeah, I mean, is that putting something into the world that's destructive? I mean, certainly there are heroes there that get redeemed, but I mean, oftentimes there aren't. I mean, art is, is intentionally ugly sometimes, and that I mean, it's a provocation, I suppose, and so sometimes it's hard to be provocative if you're not a provocative person.
I think this stuff I was listening to. Was it the guy that wrote Fight Club? I think it was him.
That's one of my favorite books of all time. Please don't ruin it for me.
I haven't read it, and I don't know about him.
It's fantastic.
I remember the movie from when it came out, but
that was great too.
But I think he was talking about being part of a writing collective, and they would workshop their pieces, and I think he was writing with the word fag. He had used that word in a piece, and his collective told him, you can't use that word. It's too damaged, it's too damaging, it's too offensive,
inflammatory.
It's too inflammatory. And I listened to him talk about the prerogative of a writer to challenge his society and to use those kinds of inflammatory things for the purpose of his art, his writing. And, him of all people is somebody that's certainly critiquing his social order. I mean, if Fight Club is anything, it's that.
Yeah.
And so, like, he feels like, I think if I remember correctly, and I don't want to put this on him, but if I'm remembering correctly, he was saying, I need that edge in my art. It's not going to do what I'm trying to do with my work if you're going to take tools away from me like this to force me to fit within society.
You mentioned to me, and I'm totally fascinated by this idea, that the fool in the court,
is the
jester,
truth teller.
is the truth teller. He's the only one that can say that the emperor is naked because it's a joke. He's the only one that can be truthful. And maybe art should be given that same leeway, right? The artist is the one who can
tell the truth about his world.
Tell the truth, and that means ugliness.
But I think it also means that you have to bear the scorn of that. Like, the jester is the fool, and that's a negative word on purpose. Like, society has to leave place for a fool and almost has to relegate the fool to the outside. Like, if you want to take that role, you have to be willing to live outside.
Well, maybe that's what art is, though. I mean, maybe, the investment banker thinks art is frivolous, and it doesn't matter. He's wrong. But, so you mentioned the Jackson 5. There's a band that I really liked called Falling in Reverse, and the lead singer was accused of gang raping this woman, and I read both accounts, and it's a he said she said thing, unfortunately, and it's very difficult. But judging, but he had served 2.5 years in prison for violating parole, which was in association with some sort of murder. I mean, the dude is like, he's got a rap sheet. He's he's got it. Yeah. So it became hard to listen to that band because of this guy's behavior. But as you say with the Jackson 5, the drummer wasn't bad. One of the reasons, my favorite things about the band is the guitar player. He's brilliant, and maybe he's not a rapist. So what do I do?
Well, and I think that this world is inhabited by these kinds of people, because, like, if you look at, like, classic rock, what we call classic rock now, the pinnacle of 60s, 70s, like post-Beatle American rock, whether it's AC/DC or Rolling Stones, all those guys, like, you've seen this 14, 15-year-old girl that was with all these different artists, Mick Jagger and everybody, and
that book Hammer of the Gods or whatever, it's basically just one rape after another. It's just insane. And but it was celebrated. It was like, oh, check out all of our exploits. And
so maybe there ought to be an indictment of the power structure behind that whole institution.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of big words. I mean, there should be. How's that going to work? I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old first cousin.
Yeah.
And I would say that killed his career.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much. But, so maybe that turned out how it should. But he's great. He's great. I love Jerry Lee Lewis.
You love his music.
And I find his behavior reprehensible. So I can't listen to Jerry Lee Lewis and not think of this child who didn't really ever have a choice in her life, So it's difficult. And if you decide that you can't separate the art from the artist because the art is an extension of the artist, right, is a sort of the artist laid bare, then is it your responsibility to look at all the art that you love and do research and decide, okay, Wagner was a Nazi, I can't listen to that anymore? Was Mozart just a complete misogynistic bigot? I mean, so that's it.
There's a principle that's taught in the New Testament about literally the verse says, "Ask not for conscience sake," and what it's talking about is that the new Christian world, the new Christian church was born into an environment, especially in the Greco-Roman world, of pagan idolatry, and this whole new Jesus thing didn't fit with the pagan world. And so a lot of the conflict that's happening with the first church, not with the Jews, there's a separate conflict there, but in the broader world, is about paganism. And there were a lot of common cultural practices that were connected to pagan idolatry. And so one of the issues was like foods were dedicated to idols, to gods, and the Christians were saying, can we eat that food if it's been dedicated to an idol? And there's very specific reasons why the church was putting a stiff arm towards those institutions of pagan worship. And Paul the Apostle, dealing with the church in Rome, where this was very, very common practice, said, listen, you don't have to run yourself ragged with that stuff. He says, ask not for conscience sake. Like, if you know it is, then for yourself and for the people around you, then you need to make a stand. But you don't have to, if you buy something in the market, just buy it and eat it. You don't have to do a pedigree of every piece of food that you eat.
Yeah.
And so he was saying there's a nuanced place to live where if you know something's connected to something evil, you need to separate yourself from it. If you don't know that, then you don't have to do a research project every time you open your mouth. Like, there's a way to live in the world and preserve your conscience that says, when I'm confronted with information that this is wrong, I need to act on it. But I don't have to go chasing it either.
That's really interesting, and it brings me to a point I hadn't really thought of before, and that is when we look at the Bible, for instance. Okay, the Bible is a book that you have probably based your entire life on, and for me, I see it as a root of some serious evil, some serious death and destruction over the absolute belief that this is the word, versus your religion, you're wrong and we're going to kill you over it, right? So if I see the Bible, the Old Testament or whatever, as evil, as having contributed so much to the world's misery, and a lot of the world's light and love as well, but if I think that, can I just look upon the Bible as this beautifully written work of literature and fiction and story, and not think of it as as that? I mean, when I look at a statue of Buddha, and I can, or the Indian Vishnu, I can look at that and go, wow, that's beautiful and it's so cool, and the people believe this, and I can think about the history and everything without believing the religion, or how many people died for the privilege of having that statue there. I can look at the statue as just the art itself and not all that's attached to it, especially when we talk about religion, because it gets pretty ugly pretty fast. I mean, no matter what we're talking about. Notre Dame Cathedral is spectacular. Because I don't believe in God, it doesn't make it less awesome for me. It doesn't make me like walk in and go, wow. Especially I can think, wow, the people who built this, there's little spires at the top, there's little corners where there's ornaments that can't be seen from anywhere. Yeah. Because they didn't build that for themselves or for me. They built it for God. So and that's a kind of a cool thing. I can go, wow, that's just so amazing to be selfless and to do that. It doesn't change my belief that there is no God, and that the belief in God has caused a lot of pain and misery and continues to do so. So I can separate that, so I can appreciate Notre Dame for art's sake. I can appreciate the statue of Vishnu for its sake. So then why shouldn't I appreciate the Beat
Michael
It
Jackson.
for its sake and not think of all that it took to create it? I mean, maybe part of Michael Jackson's genius is the fact that he was abused and tortured and spent a life in a prison of fame and fortune.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about the religious aspect of that, but I think that's another tick.
Yeah. It just occurred to me. It just occurred to me because, whether you believe in God or not, you can still appreciate the Bible for lots of other things.
Well, here's what's relevant to this conversation is that there's a difference between something that's connected to its root and its cause. And I think that's the question we're asking about these works of art. Are they connected to the cause? Like, if I put a cross on my t-shirt and go murder a bunch of people, that doesn't mean that Jesus's cross is connected to my actions of violence, because you have to say, well, what was, if I say in Jesus' name I'm killing you all, walk into a shopping mall and start murdering people, I'm either insane or that's intrinsically connected to what Jesus said, and that's easy to find out. Go and read what Jesus said. That's not what he was talking about. And so there's a difference between...
So why do we hate Muslims? You know what I mean? Because, these crazy person goes in and blows up 10 people and we think, oh, wow, Muslims are horrible. No.
Yeah.
I mean, separating one from the other is something that we do have to do. But in just going over this in this conversation, I am kind of starting to think that art is for art's sake, and that really you can't separate the two, and that it is okay. I can still see Michael Jackson as a pedophile and like his music. It's just hard for me to do that. I mean, I feel like maybe that's what I should do, because art is a manifestation of the pain and the torture and the joy and suffering and love of the person that makes it.
What if the art is the manifestation of their most horrible impulses?
Well, that's what Edgar Allan Poe is. That's what Stephen King is. I mean, it doesn't make it less beautiful. So. And in many cases, I think that maybe Stephen King puts this on paper to avoid going insane. I mean, maybe this art is an outlet to avoid bad behavior. Maybe. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't really think of an example better than that, but
yeah.
But it makes me want to. I don't know. What's the bottom line? Should you research the things that you like in the same way that we research where our shirts are made, and say, okay, well, Michael Jackson was a pedophile, Bill Cosby is a serial rapist, therefore I can't appreciate Bill Cosby anymore, I can't listen to Michael Jackson anymore?
I think for me that I have certain lines, and I think they're somewhat arbitrary, but there are certain things that do that to me, and I feel like it's right when I feel like something is connected to a person that's across my lines that I don't want to. I guess there's probably something in my philosophy that's more metaphysical. Like, I think that there are spiritual connections between things that are more than meets the eye. I think there's a potential that there are spiritual things involved in, like, if Michael Jackson is a pedophile, he makes music that's very popularly pleasing, that there's more communicated, like that the soul does something in that art that can taint it, that can cause negative effects that are more than the sine wave of the sounds that come from it. That it communicates something more holistic than just the sound.
Yes, but you don't get that from listening to it, is what I'm saying.
No.
Like, did you like Michael Jackson's music?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I did, for sure.
But now, Do you hear a pedophile?
I kind of do, yeah.
So it's not like you listened to the music and thought there's something not right here.
But I just wonder if that process of something's like when I know that change of experience is something I should listen to. That when I hear it and I'm like, oh, pedophile, I shouldn't. That's a healthy response, and that for my own health to maybe it doesn't even have anything to do with the artist or the music. Maybe it's just for me to keep my mind clear and my space straight to say I don't want that. I don't want to partake in that.
I mean, when I listen to Wagner, it's heavy and bombastic and powerful, and I gotta say, I do see a goose-stepping army, because
Flight of the Valkyrie is hard to
and the
separate from those ideas,
and the the degenerate art that Hitler decried is my bag.
Yeah.
I mean, and I love the expressionists, the German expressionists and stuff like that. And I don't know if I kind of like them more because Hitler said they're degenerate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
So I think we bring our own. Obviously we do
metrics.
when you see a painting, you see something completely different than what I do. Same with the colors. But it's something that I wrestle with all the time, my gut says you should appreciate art for art's sake, but my reality is that I can't do it.
Well, there it is.
There it is. I love you.
Love you too.